Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at Wally Presents Shattuck. This is a book from Fantagraphics this is an original art edition, which is really cool, and I believe it collects the entire run of Shattuck in original art form, which is a super rare thing to have, especially with these old type of strips that you would have access to scans of the original run. So that is really, really cool. The other thing that is cool about this is it seems like Wally Wood is just maybe doing layouts or writing, or maybe just created the strip and is largely operating with a studio. And he's using this, according to the essay in the back, to give his assistants and his up-and-comers just a place to work, to get their chops, to get paid, to get some recognition, to get some experience under his guidance. And I think that's really cool that, he kind of found a market that he was able to use to get people experience. And so along those lines, the two big names that stood out to me in this that they advertised on the back as well is Howard Chaykin and Dave Cockrum, a really big name artist that working in here. So here you get on the first one. This is by Howard Chaykin and Nicola Cutie. And you see immediately that it's a Western story, and immediately that it's pretty adult. We've got like Wally Wood, big old firm Wally Wood boobs and big Wally Wood hips everywhere. And you've got a cowboy story, and there's no real need to dig into the story here. You have this character Shattuck who is, just kind of goes from adventure to adventure, and they're pretty adult. There's always just some reason for some lady to be naked in the book. This drawing here, it was interesting, especially given what is said later in the back material about the working process for this, is that they were basically oftentimes just recompiling, remixing older artwork and tracing over it to get the compositions, and then someone would go in and ink it and kind of revise it. But a lot of compositional stuff was pretty much just swiped from other artists. So here I see a face that I feel like I've seen before. I feel like I've seen this in a number of places, or it just hits some kind of archetypal imagery. But I almost feel like I've seen that swiped by Sam Keith. I feel like this is swiped from someone, kind of a poorly rendered version of whatever swiped. Like, that face just feels very familiar to me. But there was a number of times while reading this where I felt like I've seen that before. And now that I'm more familiar with, the work of Alex Raymond, Stan Drake, all those strip photorealists, there's a lot of it I haven't read just because, like, Neil Adams, Ben Casey, God, what I would give for a good reproduction of that genius piece of art. But I'm familiar enough with those images now that I can recognize them, or at least recognize the type of compositions and stuff. There was definitely more of a formula that was being used than you see at first blush. And so there's a lot of things that felt very familiar to me in here. One thing that I had to laugh at and just showed to Tori as I was sitting there on the couch reading this, and she's looking over at me like, what is he looking at now? We were just laughing at like the idea that women looked like this in the Wild West. They were like this fit and healthy, and they weren't starving and dirty. That the prostitutes in a Wild West mining town wouldn't be rough as hell is pretty funny to me. Her little heart tattoo on her titty and stuff. I don't know. I find it a real hard time to think that you're gonna run into women like that in a brothel in the Wild West. So this is just very obviously a uncomfortable from today's standpoint book. It's pretty obvious that it's just a reason to draw titties, and it has kind of a sick worldview. I mean, I'm not like the most politically conscious person in the world, and it made me uncomfortable. Like this scene here, he basically goes in and has his way with this prostitute, and then she runs out after him. All my life I've been looking for a real man, a man that could make me feel something. When I walked into your room and you raped me, I knew that you were him. Please take me with you. And he's like, nope. But this idea that like him raping her is like, yeah, you're a real man. That's pretty reprehensible, I think, no matter how you cut it. And so while I was reading this, I was thinking, where in the hell was this getting published? Like, was this something that he was doing for Playboy? Because I know he did a lot of stuff for Playboy. Like, where is something with this kind of like casual, I love you because you raped me, just no reason, titties everywhere, book being published, and that got answered in the end. And I'll end the video with that because it makes the answer makes it way worse. The answer makes the fact of what's going on in this book way worse. Here's a page that it doesn't say who drew this one. It just says copyright 1972 by Wally Wood. And I see a WG on here. I don't know who that would be. But this one stood out to me because it kind of, this right here really looks like Howard Chaykin, as does kind of this character here, and the cheesiness of this guy's face. Like, some of the rendering that's going on in here. Like, this first page does not look like Howard Chaykin at all to me. So I think he's very well embedded in the studio style right here. And he has whoever Nicola Cudi is, Cudi inking or penciling or something. I'm not sure who's doing what, but it doesn't look like Chaykin. It has a style. This is really, I don't know who did this one, but that would be my guess, at least that panel. I do get the sense from looking at these that there's definitely multiple artists working on many faces. Like this here, this spread here is a really good example of that. I think these were being released as comics. We'll get to that. So I don't think they were printed in strip format, but it looks like they were drawn in strip format. But it looks like these were meant to be combined to create a page, even though they're strips. So one thing that I find very interesting is this is ostensibly all one image, and this drawing here is a way better drawing and a way different artist than whoever drew this one. So there's stylistic cues per image that make me think different people are laying it out or different people are finishing it. It's kind of getting passed around. Everyone's having a turn, and that makes it a curious, like, artist edition object. It's too bad. I mean, I get it. This book would have been huge. They probably need to print like twice this size. So imagine that this was like one page and then it's taller. It would have been a huge book. But it would have been cool because this is an artist edition. It would have been cool to see it all at actual size. I think it would have been informative. There's still plenty of information that you can pick up from it as is, though. And I think that's the biggest value in this book, because I have a real hard time once I find out what this actually was, finding this as something that's worth still even being in my house. Honestly, having trouble with that. But I do think there is value in seeing all the different styles, kind of comparing from them, learning from them. The art in it's good. The compositions are phenomenal. Like here, whoever composed these pages, I just think whoever this was, this says Wood and Richter, but again, there's no names on it, who in the studio is working on it. It's just like an impeccable series of compositions, an impeccable sense of like this character swings his arm up and then shoots down here, and then runs this way, drops the gun bounces because it gets shot, so there's kind of a this motion into this character, and then you kind of have the character running this way, which when you see it as like that's the whole page, doesn't lead you to the next page. But when you realize this is tiered, then you have the character running down to here, then you have the gun shot across here, tangent with this fallen tree in the back, moving over, and then here the pistol's kind of leading, but the eyes are glancing down. You kind of moving up, the rock comes up and has the same bounce trick as this, so it comes up and bounces, so that kind of falling and bouncing repeats itself, and then you have a nice ending panel. And then within each one of them, they're just phenomenal compositions. So there's a lot of really good stuff like that to learn. There's even instances here where you have a really nice composition and then you have some pretty awful rendering compared to the rest of it. The anatomy on this is quite worse. The arm looks all clumpy. The hand is very like strangely flat. The use of the brushes is not so fluid and calligraphic. But then like on this one, the woman at least is rendered very well, and these characters are a little bit hidden, so you can't tell what's going on there. And so you can see even when there's not great finish, the strength of the composition kind of can hold things together anyways. It's always better when you have great rendering combined with great composition, and this is a significantly better composition than this anyways. But this still works because it's not a bad composition. But you could still tell the difference between just the successes of like these compositions. So it would be really interesting to fit like how much of this is all the same person composing, who's finishing. I think that so I don't know if this could be done, but it would be cool if artist editions did some more like historical research like that in those senses. I think that would be pretty interesting. Here we have another basically rape attempt. He comes up on her and she's like, "What are you doing?" And the only reason that it doesn't go through is because someone's like, "Hey, come down here." You get some really weird distortions in the art here. This looks like something that was drawn like this and then got put on an artograph or something to match the perspective that's going on back here. It looks like a photograph that's been turned in space to me, which I'm really familiar with because we did that a lot in Strange Death of Alex Raymond. We took panels like this and then drew them as if you're seeing them like this. And I'm familiar with those kind of camera distortions, and this picture has a lot of that. So if they were tracing images on an artograph projector, this one to me seems like they took a panel that was meant to be viewed as a one-point panel, like a flat-on shot of a house, basically is what it looks like. It looks like it should be a flat shot like this, and then they took that panel and projected it at an angle to try and get the Dutch tilt here. And also it creates a little bit of like a three-point perspective. So whoever traced off this composition wasn't a savvy enough artist to make those perspective corrections in the tracing, and then whoever finished it didn't bother to fix it either. And it even looks like some of the line weight and stuff is actually traced. It's the kind of thing that I was doing on purpose in Strange Death is bending how the thickness changes depend on, like that changes when you go like this. So that panel is very, very strange to me. There's just a lot of really interesting studio production things in here that I would like to see a lot more like historical research. I was thinking while I was reading this and another one that I'll release a video of either before or after this, I don't know, but a lot of the old EC stuff that I'm looking at, I thought it would be really interesting to really do like a comic that analyzes them, because I don't think people are really doing that kind of historical analysis. And I think we created kind of a look and a method for that, or I should say Dave created an approach to that in Strange Death, and I think it could be expanded upon with those kind of really detailed analysis is done in comic form. So I'm thinking about that. If people have suggestion about a comic or a short story that they would like to see me attempt to do a comic analysis of a comic in, I would like to hear your suggestions, because stuff like that might be interesting. But I don't know. I'm not much of a researcher. I think that's, Dave's such a good researcher. But it'd be cool to engage in a project like that with the researcher. Anyway, we get more of the just like blatant, I don't want to say misogyny, but this kind of blatant disrespect and sexualization of women. I guess misogyny is fair enough here, where again this guy thinks that he's basically trying to get laid, and this gal is supposed to be like the good girl, and so he's trying to behave like someone he's not, and he's trying to take it slower with her, and she's really a bad girl, and so inside she's getting really frustrated with him for not coming on to her. So kind of this like no doesn't mean no, she's got to put up that front, but really she a freakadeek underneath. That's kind of interesting. There's this, when I first saw it, I was like, that looks familiar too. Where did they swipe that from? And then I realized that this is a flashback scene, and I like that compositionally they've used the same basically composition here, and then you can see the cutout. They've cut and pasted a panel from earlier in the series. It's interesting because the reproduction at that time is so poor that you can see already between these two, you can see the significant fill-in and loss of fidelity between the tones, how the tone is filled in, and just between the lines. This is a real good example for people. And this isn't, Fantagraphics didn't do the best job reproducing this either. This stuff's not sharpened. It's kind of fuzzy. Like if we scanned this at 1200 DPI and looked at it up close, which I'm not going to do because I'm doing that in plenty other videos. But this isn't they haven't sharpened this stuff. So this isn't even matching the quality of what you would see if you saw this art in person. And even just between these two, if you want an example of why me and Sean have become obsessed about this stuff after working on Strange Death, you can really see the quality difference in the art. So that's cool. But it's also strange that they were so aware of how poorly their stuff was going to reproduce that they didn't bother at all to redraw things if they didn't have to, because it wasn't going to reproduce anyway. So a photocopy cutout would do well. That's a really interesting thing to see some evidence of, and also really instructive for people to understand the difference between different types of reproductions. As we get different artists, you also get a lot of different things that they're trying. Like I think seeing that stuff that looked more, whether it was Howard Chaykin or not, it looked like someone trying some stuff out. And there's also some instances in here where there's some dry brush effects or a colored pencil going on underneath. There also looks like there may be some ink washes in different portions. There's kind of different variations on how they're producing the grays. It's especially interesting to see because it is unadjusted. You get some of the weird graynesses that are already there in the art, but because it's reproduced smaller, it's a little hard to see. Another thing that happens too is you'll get here, he's marked in a blue line pencil that he wants basically a 30% gray put on. So you see all the blue line markings underneath. Sometimes there's an X. I don't know if that means a 10% or if he's just saying put tone here, because this is X, this is X. So put tone here. It's up to you what you use. Here, I'm not sure. It just looks like X's, but here it says 30. So you can see someone making notes to an assistant, which is really interesting. 59% reduction. I'm assuming this is probably at that 59% reduction, so these should probably be about 60% larger would be my guess. It looks like this is basically a full sheet of illustration board that they ruled out on. So I would imagine that they weren't cutting the illustration board. So if you get a full size of illustration board, at 24 by 36, that's probably what you're looking at here. You're probably looking at something that's 33 by 20 or something like that, and then that makes these about 6 by 6. I think when I was working on Strange Death, they were always about 6.5 inches tall when I was reproducing stuff. So they draw big, and you get a sense of this has been shrunk probably about 60%. So that's why I was saying there's a little bit of loss in that reproduction. It's also cool to see as you go through these different artists, you notice some influence. I don't know if that's because of the tracing or just because of influence, but you definitely see some Al Williamson on this page. This is supposedly by Dave Cockrum and someone with the last name Abel, but the inks on here very, very much look like Al Williamson type of inking to me, which is pretty cool to see someone else trying their hand at that, or maybe he stepped in and did a demo day. I'm not sure. So anyways, that's what I was looking at. I started reading the story, but this sexist story about cowboys running around shooting shit up and a new adventure every 3 pages and titties, and it just didn't appeal to me. In the back, I normally don't read this kind of stuff, but I was so curious what this actually was. Who was publishing it? Why was it made? Was this just they did, 3 weeks worth of strips or however many, a month and a half worth of strips to try and sell something and it never got printed? What was this? What this is, along with Sally Forth and Cannon, are strips that were to be published by Joseph B. Cronson, owner of Overseas Weekly, his right-hand man, Bud Coach, and their California company, Richter Enterprises Incorporated. So that's the copyright of Richter. This is basically something that was meant to be sent over to people, soldiers. This was meant to be sent over to GIs. And while the paper enjoyed a reputation among enlisted men as the GI's friend to the military brass and to Wood, it was commonly referred to as the Oversexed Weekly. So basically what this was being produced for is this was comics that was intended to be sent over to young, very, very young men who had been drafted and were being forced to be soldiers. And it was, you can go back and read it when you know that and say, oh, they're just psychologically and emotionally manipulating these young men, turning them into like lusty murder rapist beasts. And like here you can even see that, even though they're not talking about that at all of these essays, you have this like line of perfect titty women, and then all these soldiers with their guns coming right out of their crotches as these knives. And it's cultural programming. Like Wally Wood, he was doing this to help people get their career started, but it's really hard to think that he wasn't aware of the function he was serving the U.S. government. I mean, maybe they were just taking advantage of the fact that Wally Wood just wanted to sit around and draw titty stories, but it's pretty evident to me that this was propaganda material intended to whip people up into a certain kind of state, and also to keep them pleased when they're over there in the war. It's like, well, here's some spank bank material. This is the best we can give you. But within that, just kind of seeding this violence and stuff is really, it's just gross. It's really icky. I don't like it at all. I don't have any problem with that kind of content in general. And it's inappropriate for sure in retrospect, but still worth reprinting in terms of its historical value. Don't edit those things out of the record, in my opinion. Also, man, it's really uncomfortable when you realize what it was for. So that's why I said it's hard to even want to keep it in my house. So I'm not sure. I'm undecided on that, but that's what it is. So if you don't have it and you want to get it, you got to know that that's what it is before. If you want that on your shelf or not. Like I'm unsure about that. There's a lot of merit to it in terms of the educational value of the art and everything like that, but it's also like, man, it's really hard to promote a product that has this purpose behind it. Here you get where they describe the process that they use in the studio, and I thought this is so interesting. Howard Chaykin said, I did a lot of drugs and ended up working for Woody. He'd rented a big old studio space over an Italian deli. Great scene. Woody went through assistance like other people go through tissue. Nick Cuddy basically assembled pencils from swipe files. So that's where you have one guy who's going through the swipe files and just composing a story that made sense. So he's basically working like a film editor. A little bit of Alex Raymond, a little bit of Ruben Morea, all this stuff. Cuddy would trace all these pieces off, hand them to Woody, who would then ink in the Woody style, so that everything came together. It was a fascinating thing to observe. After a few months, Wood fired me, and Dave Cockrum picked up penciling the Shattuck strip. I wasn't very good. I was sloppy. Woody needed someone neat. I got a lot neater later on, but in those days, I was all thrums. I was just really clumsy. So that's a really interesting peek at what they were doing. This was production. They were just trying to get it out as soon as possible and make money. And it's pretty gross and crass when you add that on top of everything else. But then you go back and you see, like kind of the craftsmanship of it all, and we sit there slobbering over the art. So it's really interesting to see that this book was almost entirely constructed out of swipes, it sounds, and that was such common accepted practice that you would be teaching new up-and-comers. We just really makes you rethink how we've kind of envisioned what a professional comic artist is. I also like the idea that you're basically just remixing. Remix culture to me didn't really hit our culture as a thing until hip hop, but to think that these comic artists were kind of doing that earlier as just a standard practice is really interesting. I also found this really interesting. One of the fun things about working with Wally at his studio was to watch him pencil the canon pages. When he drew canon, he penciled in the characters as Thunder agents, in costume and everything. Canon was penciled as Dynamo, and Weed was in there. And when Wally went to ink them, he just inked business suits on the characters. So I don't know. That sounds like a crazy story to me, a lot of work, but that's Dave Cockrum talking about working for Wally Wood. So I think that's interesting. Like, he found that shit too boring, so in his penciling, or maybe he just needed to see them naked. I don't know why he wouldn't just draw them naked. He seems obviously comfortable with nudity. So it's a strange practice, an interesting little bit. And then you have a painting here of one of the men's magazine covers by Sid Shore, and this you can see again like how this was being used to really ramp up the young men in the war. Turning the Nazis into these torturers, but then putting the sexy woman in there, and it's pretty dark and dubious when you actually realize what's going on here. So a very, very interesting piece of history, very, very uncomfortable book. Like I said, I'm uncertain about what I'm going to do with this book, but I'm glad to have looked at it, and I'm glad it exists. Well, I'm glad the collection exists. I'm not glad that the thing exists in the first place. Let's qualification on that. So anyways, if you haven't got it, yeah, that's what it is, and buy it if it's something you want, and if you're uncomfortable with it, then those are the things that are there to be uncomfortable about. So fair warning, proceed with caution. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel, you enjoy the types of reviews that we're doing, we really appreciate just the support of you watching and liking and following and subscribing. But if you want to throw some extra support, there's two ways that you can do it. The first way is through our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of engagement there. At the first tier, you basically get early access to all of our videos, and there's a pretty darn good queue in there by now, probably a couple months worth of videos that will slowly trickle out. And then at the second tier, you'll get exclusive access, previews of books that Sean and I are working on, as well as the ability to participate in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Pronade, where you can have some say about what happens in that story. Any of the money that we make on the Patreon just goes back into helping us buy the books that we review. So we try and put that back into the community however we can, and keep you all in reviews to check out. If you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of Sean's products now. The Eisner-nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.
Like and subscribe and hit the bell, please, so Carson can finish reading his books and let me go home.